right. Happy Good Friday, everybody, or Good Friday for fun. I hope you guys are all doing well and that you are staying safe and healthy and sound during this time. I know that since it is Good Friday, we are not having a Zoom meeting, and I'm trying to get a setup that I feel works best for us. So hopefully next Friday, the 17th, I will be able to figure that out so we can all meet together. So, anyway, I thought I would go ahead and post a lecture that you guys can listen to over the next week, so that way we don't get behind and we can still stay on pace. The artists that we'll be covering this week are Georgia O'Keeffe and Mr. Romare Bearden, and then Andrew Wyeth. I believe is how you say his name. It's Wyeth. And as you guys know, I do like to have some fun facts if I can find some on the artist, just so that way you get to know them a little bit more personally, since you will be reading their biography as well as their art history in your book. So we will start out with Miss Georgia O'Keeffe. This is her, kind of a stern-looking woman. But a few fun facts about her is the flower paintings that most people identify as her work actually was only a small percentage of her extensive body of work. Her actual works included flowers and some abstract art and a lot of paintings of the Southwest. So she definitely was a little bit more varied than we give her credit for. So I found that interesting. And another interesting fact is her favorite studio where she liked to paint the most was actually in the back of a Model A Ford truck. Now what she did is she actually took the driver's seat and the passenger seat out of the truck and then would just go sit in the back seat and paint. And at the time, I believe she lived in the Southwest. So I'm just kind of picturing her, kind of a artistically inclined bum sitting in the back of a truck with the windows rolled down in the beating heat, painting the Arizona desert. So, which I think is quite fun and very relatable to someone like myself. And she actually married her husband. Actually, gave her first gallery show, which is another interesting fact. And he was 20. I'll have to go back and check, but I believe he was 23 years older than she was. But he got her first gig, and they were together ever since. And his name was Alfred Stegels. I believe that's how you say his last name. And another interesting fact, they wrote 25,000 pages of love letters to each other. And I don't know about you or how extensive your love life is, but I could not imagine writing 25,000 pages of love letters to my significant other, which is it's very incredible. And apparently they kept it. They kept them to kind of keep the romance alive during their relationship, which I find very precious. And also, another interesting fact, later in her years, she actually started going blind, and so which limited her ability to paint. So she turned to sculpting instead. So later in her life, she did a lot of sculpture. She is known as the mother of American modernism, which all of our painters this week are American modernists. And another interesting fact, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1977, which at that time was the highest civil honor, I believe. So, quite an extensive woman, very impressive. All right, so we will move to her next piece. This is called The Black Iris. It was painted in 1926. And just a little, just a little note about the piece. The iris is a very familiar image in Western art, frequently used in Christian iconography. Its sword-like leaves were especially employed as a symbol for Mary's suffering a pictorial metaphor which might have also been familiar to O'Keeffe since she was Catholic in upbringing. So I thought that was really interesting. That might be some of the reasons why why she painted flowers, was because of her Catholic upbringing. But this is her most notable flower. I find it absolutely beautiful. There's one, and then there's another one which is orange, and I am forgetting the name of it off the top of my head. But typically, when you see these mildly abstract flowers, this one's not as much. The other one definitely is. Yeah, these are the works that she is mostly known for. And she, unfortunately, her art gets a little bit of a, I guess gets not always well represented, due to the fact that a lot of times people think that she was trying to paint an abstract form of female genitalia, which is not fully accurate. That's a kind of a ars grata artis, which is art for the sake of art. It's she painted one thing, someone else saw another. Unfortunately, that is art. So this is her next painting. It's called From the Lake. It was painted in 1924. I love this piece by her. And a little note on the piece, she pushes the landscape into abstraction, celebrating the rhythms and colors of the stormy Lake George country in a design that grows simultaneously from her more representational views and from her abstractions. So it's a fun way to paint the environment of extremely based on feeling. So yeah, I don't have much critiques for it. I just like looking at it personally. And this is her next one, Jemison Weed, which was painted in 1936. And a couple of notes on this painting. In her most ambitious floral still life, O'Keeffe magnified the white trumpet blossoms of the Jemison weed, arranging them in an exuberant composition charged with energy and movement. The radical manipulation of scale was one of the innovations of the modernist movement. Jemison weed, a desert plant that bloomed in the cool evening hours, thrived in the territory near O'Keeffe's house in New Mexico, is where she lived. Cosmetic and another note, cosmetic entrepreneur Elizabeth Arden commissioned O'Keeffe to paint Jemison weed for the exercise room of her Fifth Avenue salon in New York. Imitating O'Keeffe's four monumental blossoms, the fitness routine of the gym's patrons included stretching and unfurling. So yeah, this was painted for an exercise room, which I find really interesting. But it is one of her most notable works. So you do what you can, I guess. Alrighty, so for our next guy, this is Mr. Romare Bearden. He was born in 1911 and died in 1988. He is actually our first African-American artist who I believe we've studied. And then from the a few notes on the artist, from the mid-1930s to 60s, Bearden was a social worker in the New York City Department of Social Services and worked on his art at night and on the weekends. He was also a World War II veteran, and in college he was recruited for pro baseball, which reminds me of another artist that we had last week. And he received the Mayor's Award of Honor for Art and Culture in New York City in 1984, and the National Medal of Arts presented by President Ronald Reagan in 1987. So quite an accomplished man. His art, he's mostly known for collages, but he is also among the American modernists. So this is his first piece. I hope you guys can see it in detail. If not, please pause the video and take some time to see if you can zoom in on the screen or just look it up on Google. This is called The Block. It was created in 1971. A little note on the piece: in the horizontally expansive work, Bearden plays tribute to Harlem, which is where he lived as a young teen, as well as where he established his first studio in 19 1940 on 125th Street in the heart of Harlem. Bearden resided within the same building as the artist Jacob Lawrence and the novelist Claude McKay, who became tight friends with Bearden and showed a similar commitment to the arts and residents of Harlem in their art. During the 1930s, Bearden was active in the artist organization 306 Group and the Harlem Artists Guild. Even in the relocation downtown to Canal Street on the Lower East Side, Bearden continued to socialize, organize, and exhibit in Harlem, the nation's black capital. Bearden broke the long horizontal format into 6 equal parts, each exploring a distinct Harlem mainstay: brick tenement apartments, an evangelical church, Stroop's, a barbershop, a liquor store, and a funeral parlor. The push-pull to the composition, or the variation between the interior and exterior worlds, revealed the cutouts, private moments of worship, lovemaking, and the children at play, and as Bearden expressed, in quote, the lives, or the buildings, contained within their walls. This rhythm of call and response through positive and negative space are elements of church services and jazz improvisations, when originally exhibited as soundtrack of city noises accompanied and activated the work. So, quite fun, right? And it's all a collage, which I love. So, this is his next work, Mecklenburg Autumn, is created in 1979. And in this painting, a woman sits in the foreground of this work, almost as a statue, with a patterned quilt. Behind her, another woman is in the interior space. This work, entitled Mecklenburg Autumn, is a lithograph from 1979. Bearden was profoundly influenced by the civil rights movement in the 1960s. During this period, he used collage to express the rhythms of black music. Symbolic masks and faces float in the interiors and landscapes. So, I like this one a lot, but the block is definitely my favorite. All right, and this is his last work that we'll be looking at today, Patchwork Quilt, which was done in 1980. And a little note about the piece, Bearden says, and quote, I try to show, and when some things are taken out of the usual context and put in the new, they are given an entirely new character, end quote. A strategy of fragmentation and recombination informs Bearden's approach of art making. The reclining figure at the center of the work resembles those of Egyptian tomb reliefs, and his flattened pictorial space recalls Cubist painting. The background is made from collage fabric that the artist assembled into a patchwork quilt, evoking a distinctive African-American domestic tradition. So, I hope you guys can see it. I love how vibrant it is. But it does look like an old tomb relief. All right. And just keeping note, I hope you guys do let me know which artists you like. Send it in with your homework of who has impressed you this week. And if not one, then what pieces have impressed you. So this is our next artist, Mr. Andrew Wyeth with, I think it's Wyeth. He was born in 1917 and died recently. He died in 2009. He was also among the American modern realists. So a note on the artist, because I couldn't find any interesting facts about him. Everything was kind of, I guess he was seemingly normal. But I guess there is a fun fact. So his dad was an illustrator, and he actually did the illustration for the first Treasure Island book. So I guess there's a fun fact, but it's not about him, it's about his dad. So Rice realism is a meticulous attention to detail, as not purely documentary. In particular, his compositions often employed skewed vantage points and perspectives, making his subjects seem a little uncanny or strange. The strange perspective, coupled with the painstakingly controlled brushstrokes, which are the opposite of expressionistic, create a type of realism that some critics refer to as magic realism. Rice's magic realism does not traffic in fantastical subjects, but instead reveals the material world to be permeated with mystery and uncertainty. And this is his the first painting that we'll look at. It's called Christina's World. It was painted in 1948. With her back to the viewer, Rice subject Anna Christina Olsen stares at the distance, looking out for her farmhouse in Cushing, Maine. Suffering from a degenerative muscular disease, Christina was unable to walk. Rice said that she was limited, quote, limited physically, but no means spiritually, end quote, and that also, quote, the challenge was to do justice to her extraordinary conquest of a life which most people would consider hopeless, end quote. Her gaunt arms and legs and her slight frame makes the figure seem vulnerable and isolated in the expansive field, and the viewer is to put an ambiguous position, looking at her from behind. The scene contains a sense of vulnerability, containing a certain foreboding feeling. To say this is a true portrait of Christina Olsen, though, would be misleading. While the pink dress and slim limbs belong to the then 55-year-old Olsen, Rice used his young wife Betsy as an actual model here, thus fusing Christina's aging and abnormal body to that of a healthy young one. Even though Rice wanted to depict Olsen's plight, it can be interpreted that Rice made the subject and quote unquote every woman. So you can kind of insert yourself into that painting. Christina's World represents an intriguing, open-ended narrative that appeals to the imagination. Who is Christina? Why is she in a field? Is that her house? Why does she seem to be crawling? While a seemingly straightforward painting, Christina's World is in fact characteristic of Rice's version of quote-unquote magic realism, which is not fantastical or overly surrealistic, but more subtle and unsettling in its hyper-realism. As one character explained, Rice paintings are, quote, filled with hidden metaphors that explore common themes of memory, nostalgia, and loss, end quote. And the artist himself said magic. That's what makes things sublime. It's the difference between a picture that is a profound art and a painting of just an object. The profundity of Rice was unable to capture in this painting makes it one of the most well-known and admired pieces that Rice ever produced. However, it is not a personal favorite. Rice felt that the painting would have been more successful without a figure in the field. He remarked to an interviewer, in quote, when I was painting Christina's World, I would sit there for hours working on the grass, and I began to feel really, really out in the field. I got lost in the texture of the thing. I remember going down to the field and grabbing up a section of earth and settling it on the base of my easel. It wasn't a painting I was working on. I was actually working on the ground itself. End quote. So, quite heavy, but also intriguing. So, and this is his next one. Let's see if my phone works. There we go. It's called Trodden Weed. It's painted in 1951. In this unusual composition, Rice painted a person walking across an autumnal hill, but we only see the person from the knees down, wearing old, sturdy brown boots, and the hem of his coat blowing in the breeze. This is typical for Rice, and the grass and the weeds that comprise the field are rendered with the utmost detail and clarity in his dry brushstroke technique, which often metaphorically describes the tempered paint being like the earth. And he was deeply impressed by Albrecht Dürer's studies of nature, and particularly tufts of grass. The horizon line is unusually high, and we only see the sliver of a well-lit sky in the upper hand corner. The main focal point of the painting, the brown boots, show much wear, suggesting a long history. The boots, originally belonged to Howard Pyle, a former art teacher of Rice's father. Betsy acquired the boots from other from another of Pyle's students and gave them to her husband as a Christmas gift in 1950. At the time, Reith was recovering from a major operation in which he had part of his lung removed. He found that the shoes fit and wore them to walk around the fields of Kierner's farm, while he recuperated from the surgery. Wearing the former teacher's shoes must have also reminded him of his childhood, when he would dress up in historical costumes his father kept in his studio. Some critics found that the overt autobiographical symbolism of the painting overworked and cliched, but the composition is still striking. So, and this is the last of his pieces that we will look at. It's called The Master Bedroom. In the master bedroom, Wythe presents the family dog, Rattler, asleep curled up and snuggled into the pillows of a four-poster bed. Wythe's granddaughter, Victoria, said in an interview that the artist had, quote, come home tired one evening, wanted to take a nap only to find Rattler had gotten there first, end quote. She went on to quote Wythe, who said, dogs are the darndest thing. They just take over the house. Which can be true if you own a dog. While the title suggests that we are in the bedroom of its homeowner, there's also a sly nod to who the real master of the house is, the dog. Rice perfectly captured the mundane nature of the scene. The simplest white bedspread, seemingly worn in a few spots, cover the bed and pillows. The room is adorned, no pictures hang on the walls, but a small bowl sits on the windowsill. The walls, painted rather gesturally, suggest old, discolored plaster. Through the window, we see a side of the house and a few branches of the tree. The light, a low afternoon light, shines through the window into the head of the bed, not disturbing the sleeping dog. Eventually, Rife's wife did not think much of the picture and suggested it be put into the quote-unquote giveaway pile. Betsy would be surprised to learn that the master bedroom becomes one of Rife's most popular paintings. So, that is it for this week. I hope you guys are having the best time and very intrigued by everything that you've learned by these American modern realists. Please let me know also if you have any questions with your homework, and I hope you have enjoyed this lecture video. So, have a blessed week, guys, and happy Easter.